You're listening to Nothing's Off the Table, the podcast where no subject is too taboo to discuss. Now, please welcome your hosts, Andy Barker and Drew Del Pree. Turn the mic back on, dummy. Doesn't help when I'm trying to talk and the mic is still muted. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Nothing's Off the Table. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. We have a guest in the house tonight, and I'm stopping to say special guest because all our guests are special. I've noticed I kind of fall into that trap a lot. But anyway, Lou, you were absent last week.
Andy, I was absent. My mic was on. I was just messing with you. Hey, do you remember before I got hardwired, I'd sit real still? People couldn't tell if I froze.
That's great.
No, hey, I was happy to be back. I did miss Friday. Wow, great show. Wish I could have talked to him. And hopefully maybe we'll get him back and
for sure
we'll have another conversation. But wow, I'm ready to get going with our guest tonight. Can I introduce our guest tonight, Andy?
Please.
All right. So tonight we have Mellisa Kim Corter with us, right? And I'm going to let her introduce herself here in a second. I'm just going to touch on some of the academics here. But Mellisa is an international best-selling author and speaker. She has a master's in depth psychology with an emphasis on Jungian archetypal studies and is pursuing a PhD at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Mellisa, tell us more about what you're doing.
Oh, look at me. I'm the dummy. That's my fault.
No worries. Am I okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about
Thanks
that.
for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. I definitely do a little bit of everything, but to boil it down, I like to talk about the dark side of the human psyche and consciousness and ego and archetypes and all the things. I write a lot about it, speak, teach. I love to bring people through experiences where they can actually feel versus kind of have information swirling about the mind, which we have too much of these days. So,
yeah, a lot's going on. So before we get into it, I had and we talked to Mellisa ahead of time, and I let her know I had this, but I didn't tell her what it was. So we have a clip that I want to play. That's one of my favorite scenes from a movie, Full Metal Jacket. And when you watch the clip, I'm gonna have a question for you right after, okay? And I think, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
I bet it's not a clip that you're probably picturing in your head. I bet you have no idea what's coming.
No idea.
Which is even more fun for us.
My favorite.
All right, here we go. Hold on one second. We'll get her going here.
Everybody turned up got shot. Some they buried alive.
Right? Colonel? Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
A peace symbol, sir.
Where'd you get
I
it?
don't know if you
I don't
guys can
remember,
hear me,
sir.
but the volume's off.
What is that you've got written on your helmet?
Born to kill, sir.
Oh no, you're kidding me.
Born to kill on your helmet, and you wear a peace button. What's that supposed
You
to be?
know,
Some
we had
kind of
this
signal?
issue the other night. I'm not quite sure what's going on with it.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. The video.
I can't hear you guys.
You can't hear us at all? Hello? Nothing? Lou, what happened?
I don't know.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Andy,
no
and I can hear
volume.
Mellisa.
Interesting. That's weird. Let me I didn't do so we can hear you fine, Mellisa, but you can't hear us apparently, correct?
Nope.
All right. Wow, that's so weird. I think it's Mellisa. That's the excuse I'm going to go with since we had so much
Oh,
trouble.
that's so strange. You can hear me, but I can't hear you.
Yeah. Very weird. Why don't you try to well, let's see. Let me Luke can hold the show.
So basically, if you couldn't hear the clip, what was happening was it's the scene in Full Metal Jacket where Private Joker's interviewing after a big battle occurred, and you have the general who comes over and says, "Hey, what's going on? You know, you have a peace symbol on your lapel." and you have "Born to Kill" written on your helmet. And he's asking,
You're going to
what-
have to repeat that whole thing. You realize that.
I know.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now.
Excellent.
The minute you pushed play on the video, all sound stopped.
Oh no! Right.
Bizarre.
So
Huh.
that's all. That's all right. So that's the clip where the Colonel notices that Joker has a peace symbol on his lapel, and he has "Born to Kill" written on his helmet. And the Colonel says, "What are you doing?" and Joker says, "Well, I guess I'm trying to suggest the Ungian thing." and the Colonel, you can see the words ricocheting off the Colonel's forehead, right? Like, okay, clearly Joker is smarter. And so he says, was that a sick joke? And he says, no, it's the duality of man, I'm just kind of illustrating it. And he's like, son, he cuts him off. He says, why don't you get with the team? Why don't you jump in for the big win? All I ever ask is that you obey my orders. And the reason I love that scene is twofold. One, the Ungian thing, but more importantly, I love that scene because it is a caricature of my life in 22 years of the Navy, where people would ask me what I was doing, I would explain, and I would just get this blank stare from the people who were in charge.
Very
and that colonel,
one-sided.
and that colonel's in charge of hundreds of lives.
Yeah.
And he has no idea about the lives he's in charge of. No idea who's leading. He thought he was talking to this dumb private. Turns out that guy's smarter.
Right.
But that's why I like it. But it does illustrate anima and animus. Why don't you tell our listeners what is that? Because if you're not studying psychology, you really don't have any reason to know about those two words I threw out. And then how do they, what are you doing in that world?
Oh my gosh, it's such a great, it's a vast subject. So I'll try to kind of distill it down. So the anima is sort of this feminine essence or presence. And then the animus is the masculine. And the idea is that both of them are in all of us, regardless of gender. It's not a gender related sort of experience. It's just the idea that both of them are within
Right.
each human being, and they create different types of conflict purposefully within us to help us grow and expand. Another word for it might be something like, in a Jungian sense, we might call it the tension of opposites. These conflicting or opposing energies that get us to stop and go, what is this peace and war at the same time? So that we can develop the ego in order to gain a larger frame of reference to see that life contains more than just this one-sided aspect.
Right. Like almost our inner, like, should you do that? Shouldn't you?
Yeah.
We get it in different aspects of our life. Sometimes it's that animus talking to us, like, fight or flight, or or that's even a different, more physiological thing. But people understand what I'm saying verbally, or you have the other thing, like it's maybe it's time, maybe you ought to cool down a little. But yeah. But that so in what you're looking at, that sort of if I read correctly, that darker side to the psychology, the things that stand out or get us to cause reactions. How is that fitting into what you're doing?
Oh, I love it. I love it because it messes with people just a little bit. There's some curiosity around it. It's like darkness. What does that mean? And one of the reasons I chose to work with this is because I realized how much we project our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions onto things we don't understand. And when we don't understand it, we have this tendency, and I say we in a general sense, I know it's not everyone, but we could say like quite a few people would agree with the idea that when something is unfamiliar to them, it can feel frightening or scary or unnerving. And so then what we do is we project those qualities onto the thing we don't understand. And then we like to label it as evil. And so I thought, well, how could I play with not evil, but the idea of projection in a way where I could show people that darkness can be stillness and solitude and quiet. It can be the period in between who you were and who you're becoming. It doesn't have to be this frightening thing, although it can be very uncomfortable, but we can actually use this concept in order to help us grow, to stay with those tensions as they come up in our lives. Because the more that we avoid and we suppress or repress these deeper feelings or instincts or compulsions, we know that they're just going to come out sideways in our lives later. So why not get a little bit more comfortable with this territory that we're calling darkness and start learning how to confront that in a creative way that's non-invasive, non-harming, and start to feel a sense of empowerment when we look at these things with curiosity instead of this writing it off as it's bad because we don't understand it.
What can you give a specific example?
Oh, there's so many examples. Intuition is a great one. So I work a lot with intuitive development because it's something that is intangible, right? For the most part, it's kind of like electricity in your home. You know that the lights are operating. You know that the refrigerator's running. You know that there's this force that's there that you're able to utilize, and you pay a lot of money for it. So it's real. But you can't really capture it. You can't really touch it or harness it in a way to identify it. But we all agree and believe on it, or believe in it, I should say. Intuition is very much the same kind of a thing. And it's not necessarily about a certain religion or a certain mindset or anything like that. It's more of just this knowing that we have, and being able to work with that can help us to trust our decisions. When something feels off, we can listen to that and learn from it. But what happens is some people wrap up the idea of intuition also into something that is very Hollywood-like, things we'll see on TV, like Poltergeist or something where it's like externalized as a ghost or a scary, frightening force. But the truth is, it's just another tool within us that we can use. But when we deny our instincts, when we deny our compulsions, even some of the parts of us that we don't feel really comfortable with, we might have addictions or behaviors that we're not proud of, the more we bump up against that and try to push it down, it's just going to come out. So we can learn how to use these things in a way that actually better our lives instead of trying to sabotage everything we're doing. So I like to use intuition as an example, but there's a lot of different things. It can be, there's this phenomenon, we all do this, where we'll meet someone or we'll have a relationship in our lives where we're like, man, that person drives me crazy. I can't stand them, or I don't like them, or whatever it is. And what we're not seeing, we have this blind spot within us to our own qualities that are probably more similar within us than we're willing to recognize. And so it comes out in a way where we can see it. So it's taking whatever's going on within us and projecting it into the outer world. And so we have these relationships or moments with people in, let's say, the supermarket or the parking lot. And it's like this agitation rises up or some other type of emotion. And instead of questioning that, going, why am I bothered by this person or this situation, we point at them and make it about them. And the idea of looking a little closer into the darkness, into the misunderstood, into the uncertainty, is that you actually will gain a deeper understanding of who you are and realize it has nothing to do with that other person.
I feel like I'm being judged for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's maybe I'm projecting my inner guilt out on the atmosphere or something.
Well,
but go ahead, Lou.
He doth protest too much, right?
Or maybe I'm just harboring some inner intense feelings. I feel like I'm sitting in with my psychotherapist right now. Actually, none of these are bad things, mind you. So you are pursuing your doctorate, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How is that?
Yeah. It's intense. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's crazy. It's one of those situations where you think you're losing your mind a little bit, and then you realize, oh, that's what they wanted. They wanted you to literally lose your mind to become someone else. That's what the process feels like. And it matches the Jungian work when it comes to these ideas of archetypes and patterns and psychological movements and but it's intense. It's a 5-year program. I'm about 3 years in, and it's one of those situations where you wake up and go, what was I thinking going back to school in my 40s? For what reason? I could have had so much more peace in my life.
Girl, let me tell you, I know exactly how you feel, because I just started going back to school myself. I'm going for my master's, and I'm in my 50s, and I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
But
Google
it's probably
Scholar.
also a wonderful thing too, right? It's probably like on some level you're going, okay, this is probably great. Maybe.
I'll let you know in a year. Once I graduate, right now I can't see the light. I'm actually very frustrated with my textbook, but that's besides the point. That's for a whole different topic and a whole
I was
different
gonna
show.
say, I'm like, we could work with that, but
No, we don't want to bore anybody. Just me whining. But this is some fascinating stuff. So talk to me more about the darkness.
oh, so one thing that I think I love to talk about when it comes to darkness is how misunderstood it is, where some people feel uncomfortable. And I use this metaphor where I talk about, and it's a true situation, but I use it as a metaphor. So the situation, it's a brief story, but when I was a kid, I was fascinated with other people's basements, and they thought I was a little bit of a weirdo because I wanted to go into their basement and look around and see what was in there. And I didn't have one, right? So it was like this mysterious thing of like, what's down there? And I grew up on the East Coast, so the basements are stone walls. There's moss and water, and probably who knows what's going on, right? So they're a little creepy and dingy. But I saw that as an opportunity to go find things, to go look for like hidden treasure. And not that I ever found any, but I certainly was just mesmerized by what people had, photographs, things from their lineage, their history, weird antiques. And so anyhow, that metaphor, I didn't know this until probably just a few years ago. But the idea of the basement in the Jungian world, it's a symbol for the unconscious, the deepest part that we can never fully know within us. So we can explore it, we can look at it, we can work with it, and we will never know it all. We'll never get to the end of it. And there's something about that that's incredibly frightening and fascinating at the same time. And what I like to talk about when it comes to the dark part of this is that it isn't just about the things we don't like. It's unexpressed talents. It's also gifts and skills and experiences we just haven't even had yet. There's things we haven't discovered about ourselves. So it isn't just about dealing with the negative and the emotions and processing all of that. It's also what am I becoming? What more is there to my personality? Maybe there's a new hobby or something that I'm about to fall in love with and experience, so it's the unknown, but it's not just unknown in the negative sense, but also in like the mystery of what's to come. And when we start to look at that and talk about that part of it, it somehow makes some of the other things that might also be there seem a little less daunting for people. We see this a lot with like certain types of trauma work where there's repressed memories or feelings or experiences. And if you can creatively work with people using these metaphors, even just like the basement experience, that was actually a journey of authenticity for me. I just didn't know that was happening because I thought I was this weird little kid and everybody was like, stop it. They're embarrassed. Like, no, you're not going to go in the basement. What's wrong with you? But now fast forward, and I'm like, are you kidding me? All I've done my entire career is hunt around in the basements of other people and bring that forward and show them that it's okay. It's safe. You're going to find things in here that you actually love and you just didn't even know it. And I think there's something really beautiful about that.
So when you said it could be housing hidden talents, essentially what you're saying is that light just hasn't been shed upon that yet.
Exactly. That's exactly literally what the psyche does. So it's this idea that I use a flashlight as an example. If you're in a dark room and you only have a flashlight, you're going to have a very strong beam of light. Anything that is on the other side of that is going to be highlighted and in focus. Within us, within our psyche, what we have, the ego, which always gets this bad, it has a bad reputation for being a horrible thing, but actually it's a gatekeeper. The ego is what allows light to rise up into our consciousness. So it's the thing that allows us to take in more information, to see more, to know more, to experience more. So just like that flashlight, the more that we work with these ideas, we widen that beam. So it isn't just so narrowly focused, which allows more to come up into our consciousness through the gatekeeper of the ego. And that's when we experience growth, in all different forms. So it's a really powerful concept to work with. And just the idea of it alone starts to kind of create this sense of curiosity in people. Just thinking about that without even knowing how to do it, it's like, oh, I get it. When you turn the light on, you're going to see more. When you add a little more light to something, it's going to reveal more. And I think part of the coming back to the opposites, right, those opposing forces, part of the dilemma, the opportunity, and the challenge in that is we're going to discover more. And for better or for worse, there's moments where some are like, I want to sleepwalk through life. I don't want to know more. I don't want to work so hard on myself. But the more that light kind of comes in, you sort of cross this threshold where it's really hard to go back to sleep. It's really hard to not keep going and exploring and growing.
When you mentioned darkness, I'm sorry. When you mentioned darkness, are you figuratively, literally, or both?
It depends on the situation. It will absolutely depend on the situation, the moment, the person I'm talking to. Back to sort of referencing something I was speaking about earlier, with when I'm working with clients or in a situation where we're learning to help them slow down. Let's say they're in their heads and they're extremely caught up, let's say ruminating, right? Just overthinking and focusing on something that is just not helping them or serving them. When we think about that, there's this aversion to stillness. They might have to be busy all the time. They might need to fill their lives with drama or situations or be caring for other people, because slowing down and looking within themselves might be frightening. Or for some, they just don't even know how. It wasn't a part of something they were exposed to or learned about. So darkness can be stillness. It can be silence in a powerful, beautiful way. Even in a little bit more of an edgy way, if you take silence and we think more of solitude, that can be very triggering for people depending on what it is that's developing within them. So it's a broad term I use in a lot of different ways. So I think of it having lots of different shades and tones to it. It isn't necessarily representative of just one thing. Just like if somebody says, well, what is light or what is the soul, right? There might be various perspectives depending on who we are, our ancestry, our belief systems. I see darkness as the same way. It's often reflecting what it is we're placing upon it in that experience.
Interesting. Lou, did you have a question?
It was, I was just gonna mention. Are you familiar with the work Deepak Chopra had? Yeah. So later on, he sort of I want to say, I guess, got ahead of his own cart. But I liked a lot of his earlier books and a lot of the questioning and sort of not saying this is the only answer, but you may want to look here. But he did talk a lot about darkness and finding your inner voice. And in the book Unconditional Life, which is one of his earlier books, and it talked about in the quiet darkness, finding your unique sound, and then being able to focus on that sound to help you focus on resting for your meditation. And it took me a while, but mine, and don't laugh, but it sounds like tinnitus. but when I'm quiet and and I can focus and meditate on the darkness and hear my sound and focus on that to help remove the distractions. But he offers an interesting take, and I'd love to hear your comments on it. Where he says, with the advent of quantum physics, we now know that everything breaks down into protons, neutrons, and electrons. So beyond he asks two questions, right? Why are we walking around, and why isn't the table? That's protons, neutrons, right? And electrons. So he says, so that's one reason to look at the spiritual, right? There's no difference under the microscope between the two of us. at a quantum level. So how are we walking around in that not? But then he asks at a deeper level, and I think, this is more where my question is coming to. What's the difference between my feet and a firewalker's feet?
Hmm.
How are they able to do that and we are not? And I think a lot of that has to do with, like you said, like the psyche, the mental, the drive, the focus.
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great book to refer to. I'm going to have to go back and reread that. It's been a long time, but it's kind of interesting how fitting that is with the solitude and the quiet, and that,
Mhm.
The mention of darkness. And it is something to think about, why someone can, the firewalker feat, why one person will have one experience versus
Yeah.
another. Is that the conditioning of their training that allowed their body to work with the flame in that way? Is it something internal going on? And I think there's a lot of components to all of it. I don't think there's a singular answer, but I do think there's a lot of layers. And those layers, I think, are affected by thought and belief and
Yes.
experience. I do believe there's an animating force when we think about the human versus the table. And that doesn't mean that the table isn't maybe perhaps alive in its own way, as some would argue, but it certainly isn't communicating with us on our frequency. But
Right.
how do we know
Right.
that table isn't talking to all the other tables? Like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they've got their own frequency language. I don't know. But there is an animating force, I believe in, that sort of differentiates some of those things. That's my best guess, which is, I don't know. I don't know. And I kind of like that I don't know. There's a bit of mystery, a mystery to that. And I'm cautious with things that we've made so definitive. It doesn't really leave any room for another opinion or another way of seeing it, or even for us to shift in how we think and feel and believe. And I know there's things that I say today that I wouldn't have said 5 years ago. There's things that I taught 5 years ago that I kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. So it's, it's this idea that we're unfolding. I really feel that. I think we're unfolding, which ties into the Jungian perspective also of this idea of individuation, which is we're becoming our own individuals. So
Yes.
darkness in a way can also lead us to discovering authenticity. So can the light. It's, it's not an either or, it's both. I just think there's different times where one or the other can serve us, depending on who we are and what we're going through. For me, I went through a lot of what they would call like dark night of the soul experiences, where just complete uncertainty, not knowing what was going on. One of my professors referred to it as almost like a spiritual crisis. On the outside, everything's great. But on the inside, it felt like everything was falling apart. And even just questioning, like, what is reality? Think of the table and the human, right? All those deep questions started to actually become overwhelming for where I was. And so learning how to make peace with the dark, meaning at that time, what it meant was all of the stuff that was coming up that I had been running from for at least 20 years, and learning how to be with it. And it wasn't even about memories. It wasn't about specific incidents. It was just the idea of suppression in general, and going, I wonder what life would be like if I just stopped running from this and turned and faced it. And that's when all the light came back in, and the lights came back on, so to speak. And I realized there's value in this. There's value in this. And it may not be for everyone. And that's okay, but if it is resonating, then that might be something for people to think about, just in their own way, what darkness represents for them. If they could be curious about it, it will reveal more.
I'm getting the impression that you're a very spiritual person.
I try not to be, but it just happens.
Yeah. How did that experience you just described, going through the school and whatnot, how did that affect your spirit? I forget it. How did it affect your thinking?
Yeah, it changed everything. It helped me realize it was purposeful. Because in the past I would have been like, just get this over with. How do I stop this from happening? How do I feel better? How do I, like, there's a tendency to escape, to run away, to numb. Like we all, there's default behaviors that we all have the potential within us to work with. And my defaults were just, I'm going to do anything except feel. So going through this program, one of the things it did is it reminded me that there's something deeper within, whether people like the idea of a soul or not. For me, I use the word soul, but I also interchange it with just a higher self or a deeper knowing. That part of me was trying to speak to me, and I knew it. There was a knowing. There was just these experiences that kept happening. Nothing crazy. There weren't some weird like angels floating down from the sky, or none of the stuff that people really sometimes glamorize a little bit. It was more of just this inner pull, like just keep going, keep going. And then in school, we were learning about something they call like an archetypal death, which is when the ego realizes, it has a realization, not thinking the way we do, but just in the terms of like the metaphor. Think of it as like the sun when it starts to set and it moves down into the ocean. That's sort of the same in how the ego will move down closer to the unconscious. But between the ego and the unconscious, we have a true self. And I should say, this is based on the psyche, the model of the psyche in depth psychology, and where when this chaos is going on inside, whatever that chaos is. For me, it was these deep feelings. There was grief that I hadn't processed, a lot of emotion, and it felt like I was dying. I felt like I was dying, and what I kept reminding myself of is this is the death. And the rebirth always follows the death. And so what can you do to regulate your nervous system, to move through it without running away? Because it's essential, it's necessary. And they believe that we all go through this at some point. Some people will experience this a few times in their life, depending on the growth of the ego. But what it does is it moves its orientation from the outer world, from the job, the money, the labels, what society expects of us. What's happening is a breakdown of those things, and it's reorienting towards the deeper self. And that's when all of a sudden we start asking other questions. What is essential? What do I want to do with this life? Whether those questions sort of are coming in or moving through us, or we're just creating them. But that's what the actual process was. And then there's physical, mental, emotional sort of experiences of that. And it's different for every person. But the same thing that tends to kind of be the process for most people is that shift of ego to self. And it can be painful. It's when we might lose people in our lives necessarily. And it's actually a beautiful thing. They're just... we're changing, we're shifting, and we're growing, but it doesn't feel, it's not fun.
No, but it's okay.
It's a lighthearted experience. So.
Right. But I think, and I think what's important is, for people to know, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay to learn, grow, and change your mind. It's what we're supposed to do. You don't have to cling to a belief that you now have learned may not actually be applicable here.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, you don't have to die on a hill. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to grow. It's okay to read books and learn. These things are okay. It's what adults do. We change our minds. We move as we learn. And this is fascinating, Melissa. I'll tell you, especially the darkness portions of it. I mean, I think there's a ton of work that can be done looking into this stuff. Now, will your doctorate allow you to dive into that?
Oh, yeah. So I actually, next week, I begin another part of my program, which is the dissertation development. And this is where we start really honing in on what our topic is going to be for this huge undertaking. The dissertation process, I mean, we have to write a 20-page paper about what we're thinking about writing. So it's intense. It's a couple hundred pages that's expected. And one of the things I loved about Carl Jung, which ties into what we're talking about here, is that I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he said something about how and I just found this, which makes this all sort of more synchronistic and wonderful. But he had this quote about learning to study the darkness in himself so he can understand the darkness in others. And then there's a longer passage in one of the books where he goes on to say there's enough people studying the light. We need people studying the dark. It's both. And my whole entire, like, I read that and I felt this relief. Because I'll be honest, there's moments where I was like, what am I doing? Talking about darkness, I'm going to be judged and ripped apart. They're going to tell me like I'm, that I'm basically believing in evil and all these things, right? Because it's a little edgy depending on the subject matter. I read that though, and I just felt this sense of keep going. There's something to this. Now, the darker side, I will say, to this is part of what has helped me develop a lot of theories and understanding and the capacity to hold more light is also learning about psychopathy and studying psychopathic behavior. And that's something I've done for quite some time. Even at a really early age, I wanted to be a detective and a criminal profiler. I mean, that terminology wasn't there at the time, but I really wanted to study these crazy people because I wanted to know why they do what they do. Not condoning behavior, but if we can understand it, maybe we can do something about it. And I ended up just following that path. So fast forward, here we are, and I have a strong, I don't have the topic just yet, but a pretty clear idea that I will be working with the idea of psychopathy and soul loss, which is a whole other thing, but that's in the shamanic traditions. There's this idea of soul loss. And I want to compare the studies and the research on soul loss versus psychopathy, where there's a different belief around what is a psychopath? Is the soul involved? These questions that we can't really answer, but through tracing the behaviors and the actions, we can gain more clarity. And then there's also brain research showing that, the whole nature, nurture, that whole thing. But there's a lot of pieces to this that by me learning how to be with my own darkness, the part of me that's drawn to the weird stuff, the very, my mother used to call me Wednesday Addams when I was a kid. Like I was even as a young kid, like just into all the weird stuff. I would play games with oh my gosh, these poor neighborhood kids. Like I just put them through hell. But I would drag them over to the house and be like, we're going in the bathroom and we're playing Bloody Mary. And these little kids are like, what do you mean? What's Bloody Mary? And I'm like, shut up.
The Ouija board.
Don't look in the mirror. Like it was that. I was just like, I was into all of like the horror movies and all the stuff. But I wanted to be an FBI agent. Like I really thought that's what I was going to do. Fast forward, and here I am working with darkness in a completely different way. But my other thing around this is I don't study these things because I get any kind of a sense of, I don't have a sense of gratification around it in a sick way. It's more of the idea of the more we can learn and know, the more we can help keep people safe. The other piece of this is I came out of an industry that was very much about love and light and raise your vibration and only think positive. And I was like, why is it that people are getting worse? They're not getting better. They're not healthier and happier. They're studying this. They're listening to this. I was doing all of that. I was teaching all of it. And then when I started leaning into this darkness, it was like, oh my gosh, this is just me embracing more of me. That's what healed. And so now it's sharing all these things, looking at these things, these uncomfortable situations and where people go off the rails. I start to like see where what I even used to label as evil. It's like, oh, I see neurosis here, or I see whatever, right? There's different patterns. So it's even shifting my own view of darkness and how I was judging people or criminals or, but the idea is tying it into those industries and coming out of that work. I was realizing like we're really great victims here because we're just focused on the light. We're not trusting our instinct. We're not trusting that feeling we get when it's like something's really off here. Instead, we're like, oh, everybody's wonderful and beautiful. And that causes a lot of harm in a different way.
Yeah.
If we're not honoring our instincts, and I'm not talking about, I'm basically just saying that the more that we trust intuition and we learn to understand that ego orientation to the deeper self, there's a natural process of unfolding that happens, and we'll just have these subtle feelings or larger feelings, and we can pay attention to them, and then we can make decisions based on that, which will help people to not get involved with certain types of personalities, narcissism, psychopathy. So I want to sort of work in that territory to say, it's okay for you to lean in to this, to strengthen the ego, to understand that not everybody has the best intentions. We don't want to live in fear, but we also don't want to be blind to the fact that we have to be discerning about who we spend our time with, who we share ourselves with in different ways. And that's something that's really important, because I feel like there's a tendency to only focus on the light, and that can cause a lot of harm in its own way too. So that's
sure. So there's a no, you're good. So there, I wanted to let you know, if you never, I've watched it like 4 times. There's a documentary on YouTube, How to Protect Yourself from a Psychopath.
Oh, interesting.
I love it. I love it because of the visuals. It's very low budget. And
the best.
And I wish I knew how to do it. But there's a portion in there where he talks about psychopaths just view failure differently. It's never their fault. It's everyone around them. But because one of the places to protect yourself from a psychopath is the corporate, workplace.
Right.
And I took that, and being a thinking adult, applied it in a positive manner in my life, where I started to, hey, wait a minute, I need to view failure differently.
Yes.
And I really like the Andy and I are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. I'm a lot better.
Whatever.
I'm a lot thinner. No, not even that anymore. But anyway, in jiu-jitsu, right? What do they say, Andy? They say win or learn, right? It's not win or lose. It's win or learn, and that's a way of viewing failure differently. It doesn't have to be in a psychopathic manner.
Right.
I just had this discussion yesterday with someone. That exact discussion, Lou. You either win or you learn, and I told him I'm highly educated at this point.
Right. Earth school, right? That's where we're at.
Yeah. That's how it works. So I was going to ask you, who's your favorite serial killer? I have one. If you want me to go first, I'll go first.
You go first.
I'll go first. Okay. Belle Gunness. Have you heard of her?
Ooh. Oh, I know the name, but I don't know the
Yeah, number
story.
one woman serial killer in the world.
Interesting.
And I got a book on. When I heard it, I thought, this is insane, right? So I got a book
Literally.
on her I listened to 2 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think she's a horrible human being, but
Yeah.
but in the realm of how the crimes were committed, I think just a genius.
Right. That's the thing right there. That's exactly what we need to look at. Not just how did they do what they did, or how they got away with it, but also like, what are the deeper impulses around this? So in the Jungian work, we can look at the archetypal, there's this belief, this idea that beneath the surface in the collective unconscious, there's archetypes, and these aren't fixed structures. Think of them more like we can all probably have a different, not only do we have a different literal mother that we may or may not know, but we have different representations of mother. Some of us had kind mothers, some of us not so much, right? So the idea of mother is very flexible. That's how the archetypes are sort of portrayed when it comes to being these containers of experience, of a psychological movement that we can track and trace. So applying that to serial killers, to psychopaths, we can actually look at, and this is why a ritual is such a big part of their experience. There's these deeper forces, and I'm not talking about evil or things like that, but they're the psychological patterns that are happening. There's not just a unmet need, but there's some unfinished business within them. So they're either projecting, they're seeking, there's something going on there. And when we can look to their rituals, to the thought patterns, for the ones that will actually talk about, if they're able to talk about what they did and why. For that reason, I don't have a favorite, because there's something in me that just, I can't even say that it's a favorite. Like, there's a part of me that's like, oh my God.
I hear you. It's
so
a
much
terrible
hate
thing
for
to
people.
say, kind of.
But
Andy, do you have one? Before you go on?
I do have one. I feel like gives us a lot of information that I can share. So I will say that Jeffrey Dahmer is a ripe, I would say,
He's ripe, all right.
psychological shit show, if I can say that.
Yeah, he used to love the long pig. He used to love the long pig. That's what the cannibal tribes down in South America refer to humans.
Interesting. Interesting.
Apparently, it tastes like spam. This is insane. I'm serious. So the other day, I come up on TV and I heard somebody make a joke about the long pig. So I Google it. It's an actual translated term from a recently decannibalized tribe.
Wow.
Right? They did refer to humans as the long pig. And as I was reading the article, the people who transition these people off eating humans said they love spam because spam apparently is the closest thing to human.
Wow.
Gross.
That's
I've never had
fascinating.
spam and I never will again.
I won't have it anymore, I'll tell you that.
That's insane. It's insane. I just came across it because I heard a joke. That's how this cascaded when he
That's
into
how it works.
I would have to pick Richard Ramirez.
The Night Stalker.
Yeah. Just his man, if I could get in his brain and just it's fascinating. It's intriguing beyond probably a normal, healthy, you know.
Yeah.
But
That's the
real quick, I wanted to mention Betty Skinner in the room said everything Mellisa does, she does 1,000%. Can't wait to see where she goes with these studies. I'm a fellow dark shadow psychology lover myself.
Oh, she's a gem. Hi, Betty. Love you. So glad you're here.
But yeah, Richard Ramirez, what a fascinating and not necessarily a good way
Right.
character.
Yeah.
But
That's a different F word.
yeah, right. You know, it's so because you know the rating I did on him, he was just, you know, he didn't like to shower. He was a stinky dude, and he was just, you know, weird in so many different ways. But you know, the abuse and all. We don't need to go down that road.
Significant that the not showering is also psychologically that could represent someone that has been abused who is unknowingly using that as a defense to keep away from intimacy or closeness with others. So that's a really interesting, that's one of the things that stood out to me about him as well in the police reports and the different, you know, documentaries and things like that, was that extreme odor that people noticed. So there's also a little bit of like a controlling element in that too, if you think about it, because it's another way of sort of impacting people's senses. And your sense of smell is extremely critical for safety and boundaries. So it's weird how this all kind of, you know, when you start breaking it down and thinking about it, it's pretty interesting how much information is there just in that one fact that you just shared.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I'm very intrigued with the whole abnormal psychology field. It's really, you know, when I look at it and I dive into it, I'm like, all right, and it's normal to find some of the I don't know how you want to say it. I'm drawing a blank here. The characteristics, if you will, that I'm like, oh crap, do I exhibit those characteristics? You know, am I crazy? Well, yes, but that's beside the point. But this is incredible. Oh, for sure.
I think too. You know, when you know, it's an excellent topic to discuss with, you know, Andy and I are both combat veterans. And you know, one thing about that is, you know, you see the best of humanity and you see the worst of humanity. You know, and I was thinking about this the other day. I got called to a deposition. I used to work at a jail, right? And so it happens all the time. I have to go to these depositions, even though I don't work there anymore, but whatever. So you know, you have to go, and you know, you're talking about you know, a man had threatened me, and I brought that up, and their question was, you know, well, you know, why didn't you report it? And it was the opposing attorney, and I was like, well, should I have been scared? Of course, he's not going to go on the record and say, yes, you should have. Right. So so I maneuvered him into a place where he had to say, no, his clients all talk. Right? So anyway, he wasn't happy about that. But my point to him was, you know, I said, and you wouldn't understand this, but I made peace with my death a long time ago. You know, I had to, you know, and we all kind of did. I said, but I also know the difference between a killer and people who can kill. is I think your client is a person who can kill because he's desperate. I said, but do you think he's a killer? I didn't. So that's why I didn't take it seriously, because we've met killers. I know what killers look like, and killers don't threaten you every time you see them. They kill you.
Right.
Interesting, right?
So I've seen people, as soon as the shooting starts, they are on it, and I'm not one of them. When the shooting starts, I'm looking around going, am I dreaming? Because I want action to happen. I want to be a part of it. I want the stories. So I'm like, am I dreaming? And then I'm like, no, this is really happening. Okay. And then I go, do my thing. But it takes me a second. It doesn't click right away. But Andy and I have seen people, man, not only does it click, they sensed it and were on it before it started. Yeah.
There's a high percentage of psychopaths in the military. They've actually, the statistics show, because they can shut down not just empathy, but there's other things. There's actually a really great video. I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but there's a video I saw recently where they were saying that in some of this research, they think that this psychopathic individual might be a different form of person who was meant to be like when we had like caveman times, fight or flight, hunting. There's a connection there about maybe being a part of what could have prolonged the species without having empathy. So that's another interesting angle. But there's something that a term that I find it very haunting. So I just wrote about this in this paper I did, but the term is called a lacuna. Have you heard that before?
No.
Oh, so the lacuna is sort of this, think of it as a space, an empty space, but something should be there, but it isn't. And so comparing the lacuna to the psychopath, it's like, should empathy be there? Should the soul be there? Is it missing? Is it not right? It's this very eerie sort of feeling that can leave us unsettled. Like, what is it at the core to these people? One of the videos I also saw, I thought it was brilliant. The guy was like, it's really difficult for us to study them because they need to study them in the wild, like right out in the world, because when they're right? You don't know always who's honest, who's telling the truth, what's part of the act, right? And it's difficult for them to actually give like true accounts. So then it's like, okay, well, what the information we are getting in this research, how much of that is narcissism versus psychopathy, right? And there's these really interesting things I never ever thought I would want to know about a human being that come across when you start studying this stuff and peeling back the layers. But lacuna, I don't know, that just gives me the creeps in like a really interesting way. So naturally I got to research it.
See, and talking about this makes me go back and wonder, do I not have some psychopathic tendencies because of the ability, like Lou was saying, when rounds are coming down range, you just go into a different mode. Mm-hmm. Especially when you get that first hypersonic, supersonic crack right by your ear. That'll wake you up.
The overpressure.
Yeah. But that's look at the time.
I know, it's so crazy.
It is. Hey, Mellisa, don't go anywhere when we end the show and cut the stream. Stay here, so we can thank you afterwards as well. But a big public thank you for coming out here before we get into our segment. Thanks so much. What a fascinating conversation.
Indeed.
Thank you guys. I love getting to talk about this anytime.
I really enjoyed it. Lou, I'm going to put you on the spotlight here.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do it. What you got for us in our Veterans Helping Veterans segment?
For Veterans Helping Veterans, we're going to go with a nice one that's near and dear to my heart. It's the Marine Raider Foundation. MarineRaiderFoundation.org. You can head over there, and as is illustrated on their website, the Marine Raider Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization established in 2012 to provide benevolent support to active duty and medically retired Marine Raiders and their families, World War II Marine Raiders, and the families of Raiders who have lost their lives in service to our nation. The foundation aims to meet needs unmet by the government with an emphasis on building personal and family resilience and supporting the full reintegration of wounded, ill, injured, and transitioning Raiders, their families, and MARSOC's Gold Star families. I would like to say they're very active on social media. They do a lot of good. They keep every month they honor a different Marine, who passed. You'll see them on Twitter and various other things, but they're also doing a lot with the families when our Marines are coming home. And the Raider Foundation, high degree of KIA in that type of unit. So we always like to support them and their families. So check out the MarineRaiderFoundation.org.
Indeed, sir. Thank you so much for that. It's a funny thing. I was driving down the road yesterday, and I saw a Recon Jack sticker on the back of a dude's Jeep. And I pulled up next to him. I said, "Hey, you a Recon Marine?" And he's like, "Yeah, I retired." I'm like, said, "Hey, how you doing, brother? Man, it's been a long time, And then I said, "Yeah, I was." He goes, "Are you a Marine?" I said, "No, I was a doc." He goes, "Oh, okay." So I was in Alpha Company 3rd Recon many years ago, and he goes, "Oh man, Alpha Company, man, they've been disbanded for a while." I said, "Yeah, thanks for making me feel older, buddy."
Right.
But anyway, fascinating show tonight. I really enjoyed it. Mellisa, thank you so much. Like Lou said, stick around. I'm going to bring us out, and then once we're clear, we'll talk the real smack. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Betty, thank you for joining us this evening. That was nice of you to make a comment, and we will see you guys next week.